Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel and thanks for logging on. Today, it's a steel chronograph smackdown. Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Chronograph versus Rolex Daytona. It's going to get real, it's going to get steel, and we're going to start with the veteran in the space. Important dates for the Daytona. Launched 1963, originally as the Rolex Le Mans. It gained its first automatic iteration in 1988 with Zenith El Primero power. The basic watch you see here, that is the basic chassis and the movement, launched in 2000, but the steel ceramic version, as depicted, was probably the darling of Baselworld 2016 when it launched. Still one of the it watches of our moment. The watch has had remarkable legs, and that's a testament to just how right Rolex got it out of the gate. Let's throw it on the wrist. Now, the timepiece is 40 millimeters in diameter, and these watches are only separated by 1 millimeter of nominal size, but they do wear quite differently. The AP, not surprisingly, is thinner, but not much thinner. The Rolex is 12.3 millimeters thick, the AP is 11. 40 millimeters is the size here. That's not including the crown pushers or crown guards, but lug to lug the watch measures a very wearable 46.6 millimeters. It's 50.5 millimeters if you measure the solid end links. So in terms of ergonomics and fit, this one probably has the edge on the Royal Oak, which does wear a bit large. The oyster bracelet's a handsome piece, and as you can see, it's a 3-link design with polished centers, satin shoulders, and polished outer facing. Removable links are fixed by screws, but most of the adjustability in this watch is built into the clasp. You can see it's a clamshell, but it's not a conventional clamshell. There are 2 locks. I can't pull the thing open. I'm really tugging on it. I need to unhitch it. This is an articulated component with a beak and horn system. Inside the clasp, you actually have a 5 millimeter easy link system, so that's 5 millimeters of adjustment. It's the equivalent of adding or removing 1 link. And then you can see that there are anchoring points inside the clasp. There are 3 different points. So you have the easy link, you have the removable links, and then you actually have the anchoring point adjustment system. Close it all up, and now you've got 2 locking systems, one with the clamshell. Very nicely made. Now, Rolex does use 904L stainless steel, and the principal advantage of that is going to be the fact that it is highly anti-corrosive. You don't really need to rinse it after contact with cosmetics, chlorine, or salt water. Mostly academic. The ceramic, however, does make a distinct difference relative to the Royal Oak. Now, the cases of the watches, though similar in thickness, could not be more different in character. The Royal Oak is angular, sharp, severe. It has a few curves, but for the most part, this one's all about creases, like a finely pressed suit, whereas the Rolex, maybe not quite as masculine in profile, but sexy and sinuous. It has compound curves that play havoc with the light across its surface. And there is a big difference between a Royal Oak bezel and a ceramic Rolex Cerachrom bezel, and the difference is all to your advantage, as this will not scratch, scuff, or disfigure. If you're not the type to fracture or shatter sapphire crystals, this bezel is probably going to run interference on case damage without any visible signs of wear for the entire time you own the watch. Screw down crown, screw down pushers. A bit of an impediment to use, but it does give the watch 100-meter water resistance versus 50 with the Royal Oak. Solid case back, but it's a Rolex manufacturer caliber 4130. 72-hour power reserve, automatic winding stop seconds, free sprung, full balance bridge, parachrom blue anti-magnetic hairspring, overcoil hairspring structure, and a COSC certified Swiss chronometer that is then cased up and recertified to Rolex's proprietary superlative chronometer standard, which their attestation is no worse than -2 + 2 seconds per day. Very impressive stuff. Vertical clutch, column wheel chronograph. Now, let's jump to the Royal Oak. The Royal Oak, first launched in 1972, gained its first chronograph variant in 1997. The model you see here debuted at SIHH in 2017 as effectively the 20th anniversary version of the Royal Oak Chronograph. It became a 41 back in 2012. The dial that you see here, as well as the simulated screw-down pushers, launched in 2017. Let's back off a little bit so you get a better sense of the watch in proportion to my wrist. It's incredibly broad. 11 millimeters thick, so it is thinner than the Rolex, but it is far broader. Though a 41 millimeter watch, at least in theory, lug to lug this watch measures a robust 51.6 millimeters. And if you measure the plots, that is the outer links that can't be bent down, the watch has a rigid distance across the wrist that is almost offshore-like at 54.7 millimeters. So in effect, this wears as a far larger watch than the Rolex. That said, everything external that is made of metal is excruciatingly hand-finished. These creases, these curves, these breaks between satin and polish, the perfect alignment of the hairline bevel down the links, the chamfering of the links in between, as well as the polish of the intermediate ends. All of this is exquisite and done by hand. This is not an industrial product. This is not a mass-produced watch. You can see there's no special adjustment built into the clasp, but you do have many individually removable links fixed by screws. The timepiece does feature a trigger action, which makes it quite distinct from the Rolex clasp, which features a clamshell and a vertical lock. No real difference in solidity or security, it's just a matter of pure preference. The timepiece featuring a case that is all of that, perfectly aligned creases running down from the bezel straight through the case into the case back. You can see that the bracelet is held on by screws, which I consider to be an extra measure of security compared to Rolex's spring bars. I've never seen the spring bars fail, but I prefer screws. The watch has the look of screw downs, but the 26331ST that you see right here does feature conventional pushers that are always at the ready. They look like screw downs, but they're always ready to use. They simply prefer to give you a more robust appearance as well as some shear guard profiling, and it acts effectively as a blocker to prevent damage to the pusher. You can see that the bezel, polished and satin finished, rounded and flattened, featuring the characteristic hexagonal bezel bolts in white gold, and the crown itself, as well as the pushers, or I should say the pusher's shoulders, recapitulate that hexagonal shape. The dial cut on a pantograph lathe. The dial of this watch is as traditionally crafted as the bracelet, the clasp, and the case components. The pantograph lathe, effectively a mimicry engine from the 19th century, used by Audemars Piguet. Now, these are in-house dials, but it takes a large template and cuts all of the details, including the micro pebbly grain that you can't see here but can see with the loop, into the small dial blank, and then it's galvanized black. One of the changes for 2017 was the emphasis and enlargement of the chronograph counters from minutes and hours, and the minimization of the constant seconds subdial. You can also see that there is a loop style counterweight to the needle seconds hand and baton style hour and minute hand. Big difference with the Rolex, there is a date window. It's an unobtrusive monotone disc that makes this highly practical feature unobtrusive. It doesn't spoil the balance of the dial. Frederic Piguet 1185, doing business as an Audemars Piguet 2385. Unidirectional winding, 21.6 beat rate, 40-hour power reserve. It features a quick set date, but it does not feature hacking seconds. Vertical clutch and column wheel. It has those same refinements that you find in the Rolex. It's adjusted in 5 positions. It's a high horology, ultra-thin, integrated automatic vertical clutch column wheel movement that helped to influence the later Rolex caliber 4130. So this is a high horology caliber, and although you can't see it, it is finished to a higher standard by Frederic Piguet, also known as manufacturer Blancpain. It is finished to a higher standard than what's inside the Rolex, but you're going to have to take my word for it. 50 meters water resistant with a screw down crown. This is a swimmable watch, just not quite to the extent of the Rolex. I would take this one swimming. I would take the Rolex snorkeling. That's the difference right there. I wouldn't dive with either one of them. Let's talk about advantages. Okay, truly handcrafted bezel, case, bracelet. All of these components are gorgeous, immaculate, millimetrically perfect, and yet created using artisanal knowledge and eye-hand coordination. This is not a mass-manufactured product. This is a craft product. Also important to note, this is a watch that has a ton of currency with horological enthusiasts as well as the Gen Pop. In fact, I'm going to shout out both watches for having that quality. What sets this one apart is that it also has the craft art inside on the dial side. Not only is it a recognizable shape to the world, but the dial is worth looping, and I can't say that of the Daytona. The pantograph cut tapisserie remains a highlight of this watch, and it's something you will appreciate more as time goes by. The more you look at it, the more you notice. It's a journey of discovery. High horology movement finish, though you can't see it, it's in there. It's psychic satisfaction for you and eye candy for your Audemars Piguet watchmaker. I would also say, realistically, the date function is practical, and most of us, if we're honest, like and use that feature. It feels special on the wrist. There's something about the way these links move, the solidity of the bracelet, the heft of the watch compared to the Daytona. It does feel, eyes closed, more special. You realize you're wearing something truly extraordinary. Also, I'm probably going to call this the pre-owned buy of the two. This is a watch that sells new for $24,300. It sells pre-owned for $24,000 to $25,000. Now here's the thing: the Rolex is $12,400 new, but it sells pre-owned for $22,000 to $23,000. So if you buy this watch pre-owned and skip the wait at the dealer, you're going to pay something pretty close to its retail price. Whereas with the Rolex, it's almost like a speculative endeavor. You may not want to speculate in watches. You're a hobbyist, not an investor. And I can't tell you whether that Rolex will perpetually be worth literally twice its MSRP forever. This, I'm a little bit more confident in it pretty much standing pat. And finally, I would also say that the no-screw pushers are a functional advantage. Most of us don't want to play with these things, and getting the same degree of water resistance without having to worry about screwing down or screwing out the pusher, that's a convenience that you won't enjoy with the Daytona, or, for that matter, older Royal Oak chronographs. Now, let's jump over to the Daytona. The Daytona wins in every measure of movement tech. Do you want an anti-magnetic hairspring? You got it. Do you want a stop seconds function? You got it. Do you want a 72-hour power reserve versus 40? You got it. 100 meters water resistant? That's more of a case feature, but yep, you've got that too. And on top of everything else, Rolex is attesting to a precision rate. So they're actually saying that the watch will keep -2 +2 seconds or better per day. Both of these watches have 5-year warranties, but I feel over time the ceramic bezel of this watch is going to mean that although mechanically you're covered with both watches, this watch is going to age better with the blocking qualities of the ceramic protecting the rest of the case and preventing the bezel itself from scratching and scuffing. I'll also say that this is an easier watch to wear on a small wrist. If your wrist is smaller than 15 centimeters circumference, this one is the ergonomic winner, and that by far. I'll also mention that with a free-sprung balance and a full balance bridge, this watch is more shock resistant. I would also say that depending on how long you want to keep and enjoy the watch, you can't lose if you buy it new. This is the thing. It will never be worth less than $12,400. The AP might be worth a little bit less than retail if the world economy takes a downturn. This watch bought at $12,400 will always be worth $12,400 at least. It's a tougher proposition pre-owned, but this is the one to buy new of the two. And finally, I have to say that all things considered, it is a more elegant watch. It's not a more artisanal watch, but it is a sexier watch. Both of these watches have immense penetration with the Gen Pop as well as the horological community. Watch collectors of all stripes, serious and casual, respect these two immensely. Even my mom, who's not into watches, and my sister, who's definitely not into watches, would recognize both of these shapes, so they're rare watches that transcend our specialist hobby. Both are appealing, but ultimately, I think I have to go with the Audemars Piguet as the truly craft product, the low-volume product, the artisanal product. It appeals to my heart more, even though the Daytona appeals to my head. This is the intellectual choice. This is the emotional choice. You guys let me know yours in the comments below. The loom shot, by a narrow margin, goes to the AP. I'll also throw in one more advantage of the Rolex, more clasp adjustability, 3 stationing points, and easy link. But again, the final battle, loom, is all about Audemars Piguet. At least that's my opinion. Tell me yours.